Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And for the past several nights, maybe even couple weeks, I've been working on photographing the giant Squid Nebula, which is sitting in front of the flying bat. So it's a bubble of oxygen against a background of red ionized hydrogen. And last night I captured some additional data. So what I want to show today is how to take the additional data and combine that with the image that I've already spent time processing rather than starting from scratch. So we'll do that in PixInsight and Photoshop. Let's start in PixInsight, and I'll show you what I did there. So first of all, just looking at the folder where I have all the files, I've been collecting data since June 5th, and then last night was June 14th. And I started out capturing sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, and then red, green, and blue. So I've got red, green, and blue for the stars, and then hydrogen and oxygen for the HA region of the flying bat and the O3 region of the giant squid. But then the last couple nights I've been capturing just oxygen. And so as you can see last night, all I captured, I just ran oxygen all night. Got 29 frames of oxygen. And that's after I've already culled out some of the ones that I didn't think were acceptable. So the first step is to run that through the weighted batch preprocessor. And rather than running everything, I'm running just the oxygen, but I'm running all of the oxygen. So this is all of the oxygen from all of the different nights. And I don't actually want, I've got some master lights in that same folder that I don't want, so I'll remove those. So here we have just the oxygen files from the last few nights. And you can see there's 81 frames here. And on the calibration frame, or calibration tab, I should say, I only do a couple things. I set a pedestal of 300, and then I set the output directory for the giant squid, and obviously loaded the calibration masters. And this is ready to run. And what it's going to produce is a single master file, so a master light with all of the images captured and stacked. So this is the only thing I have here is just the auto stretch on this image. I'll go through my usual processing of applying gradient reduction, sharpening, and then stretching the image, applying noise reduction and star removal. And that gives me two files then. That gives me the starless image of the giant squid, and also the stars that are extracted from that by Star Exterminator. And the stars are important in this case because I'm going to use these to align this new data into the existing Photoshop file. So these get saved as 16-bit TIFFs, and now we're ready to go into Photoshop. And that's where we're actually going to use the new data in place of what was used before. So here's the image in Photoshop, and I've already done basically all of my Photoshop processing to this. If you look at the structure of the layers palette over on the lower right-hand side, at the bottom is the HA data, and if I alt-click on the eyeball, it'll turn off everything but that. So there's just the hydrogen data. Oxygen is above that, so there's just the oxygen. And then I've got some global adjustments. This is just a global levels adjustment that's slightly adjusting the brightness, a little bit of an adjustment to color balance, a little bit of an adjustment to hue saturation. This layer is a very dark, it's actually 191919 RGB, and it's in lighten blending mode. And its only purpose is to make sure that there's nothing in the image darker than this 191919. And if I turn it off and on, normally you don't see much impact. The only place you do see an impact is places where it had had gotten darker than that, and it's just bringing that back up. Generally, those areas are nothing but dark noise, so lifting them back up and smoothing them out just helps the image overall. It's not a big impact, but it does have an impact. And then lastly, the stars are on top. So what I want to do is add the new oxygen data, and we're going to plug that in here in place of this oxygen data, but we want to keep all of our other, we've already spent time finding the correct color balance, and there's no sense changing or redoing all that. All I want to do is put in new data in here instead of 6 days, I have 7 days worth of oxygen. So first I need to open the oxygen starless image and the stars, and to do that I'll go to Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and I'll just browse for the folder where I have the data. So it's right here, and I usually keep my folders sorted in descending date sequence. So there are the last two, the oxygen and the oxygen stars. Click OK to select those, and then OK again to load those. And what Photoshop did was just to create a new document that has just these two layers, the layer of the squid and then the stars. And I'm just going to put these together into a single group. So I'll select both layers, tap Control G, and that just put those into a single group so I can move them and deal with them all in one. And to start with, I want these to sit at the very top above the stars and everything else. So I'm going to make the stars layer, actually the layer group, the active selected layer, which is a layer group, and then anything I drag into this image is going to go on top of that. So we can go back to our oxygen that we want to add. I'm going to select the Move tool, and then I'll just click and drag, and can keep the mouse button held down, drag the mouse pointer up to the file where I want to drop it, and then still holding the mouse button down, I'm going to drag it down into the image, and I want to drop it aligned into the same place. So I'll hold the Shift key, and now I'll release the mouse, and it has dropped the stars into this image. Now, if these were all aligned to the same reference image, I would be done, but in fact they're not, and I don't normally do this, but I did crop just a little bit of the oxygen and hydrogen in PixInsight when I processed this. So we have to manually align these stars. But it's actually quite easy. The stars from the oxygen is on top, so that's what's visible in this new oxygen group that we just drug in. And if I play with the blending modes, if I put this, for instance, in lighten blending mode, now all you really see is the stars that we just drug in. And I'll just use the Move tool, and you can see I can move them around and line them up with the stars that are already in the image. And if I want to really be precise, which typically I do, I would change from lighten blending mode to difference blending mode. And what difference blending mode does is just shows you the difference between those two layers. And now I can very precisely center these oxygen stars on top of the ones below. If I needed to transform this, I could transform this whole layer group to, if I needed to change the size a little bit or change the rotation. But in fact, the rotation is the same and everything lines up very nicely. So now I know, since I aligned this whole group using the stars, I know that this oxygen that I pulled over is properly aligned to the image below. So with that, I'm going to just turn off this layer group and we'll open up the oxygen. And what I want to do is drag this oxygen, the new oxygen, down here and put it right on top of the old one. And that will effectively replace this oxygen layer with this oxygen layer. So we'll just click and drag this layer down into the oxygen group. And there it is. And at this point, I have now replaced, you can see I can turn this layer on and off, and it's not visible because it's below the new oxygen layer that I just drug in. If I turn the new layer off and on, that was before, this is after, before and after. So you can see we picked up a significant amount of additional oxygen in here. It may have been stretched a little bit differently in PixInsight, and that's why it's a little bit brighter. So I would probably want to go to this levels adjustment layer within the oxygen group and probably fine-tune the brightness of this new oxygen layer just to try to balance it so that it looks correct. If I want to do any filters, which I probably will because I've got, as you can see, a number of smart filters applied to the prior. So what I'll do is I'm going to start, first I'm going to do a little bit of editing. This is the new oxygen layer, and you can see there's some stray remnants of the star spikes here. You may want to remove those. There might be satellite trails or things that you would want to edit out, so you would do that first. And then I'm going to add just a series of smart filters, and to do that I need to convert this into a smart object. What a smart object does is encapsulate one or more layers into a single object that acts like a single layer. And it also lets you apply smart filters, and what smart filters let you do is non-destructively apply a filter so that you can edit the filter and change the settings later. Even after you've saved the file, as long as you don't flatten the file, I could come back next week and change those settings. So first I'm going to go ahead and delete this old oxygen smart object since we don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to apply what would be kind of my usual sequence of smart filters. First, I need to turn this into a smart object, so I'm going to right-click out here to the right of the layer name and choose Convert to Smart Object. So now this is a smart object, and you can tell that by the icon or the little badge here on the layer thumbnail. So first I'm going to apply some sharpening. So I'll go to Sharpen, Smart Sharpen. And the settings aren't particularly important because we can always change these later. And I just know from experience that's a kind of an appropriate amount of sharpening for a narrowband image. Doesn't make a big difference, but it does make some. And there may be some noise that's getting amplified away from the squid. So I want to use a mask to hide this smart filter from sharpening the oxygen out here in the field area. So to do that, I'm going to click on the smart filter layer mask, and then I'm going to grab my brush tool and paint with black as my foreground color at 100% opacity. And when I paint with black on this layer mask, it's going to hide that smart filter from being applied to these areas. And you can see on the layer mask thumbnail where I've painted with black. If I press the backslash key, it will show a ruby overlay of where I have painted with black. I can also alt-click on the layer mask and it'll show just the mask, and I can even see some places where I messed. So I might want to fill those in. And then alt-click to go back to a normal view. If I shift-click on a layer mask, it disables the mask. So if we want to see with and without, you can see the layer mask doesn't make a big difference, but it does make some difference. Now I want to apply a different mask, or a different smart filter, I should say, but I don't want to use this mask. So I'm going to right-click and convert this smart object into another smart object. So that's encapsulating this filter and mask, and now we have a new smart object. We can stack another filter on top of this, and to do that I'm going to add a noise, dust and scratches filter. And I want this to be large enough radius to smooth out any noise that's especially in the background area. So I will click OK to apply that. And in this case, I don't really want to apply it to the squid itself. So again, I'm going to click on the Smart Filter mask, and I'm just going to paint with black over the squid to hide that noise reduction filter from having an effect on the squid itself. Now I'm going to convert it to a smart object again. And this time we're going to add a local contrast filter called a high pass filter. And we have to go through a couple steps before you can really see the effect. First, I have to add the high pass filter. And I'm just going to take the last setting I used and click OK. Now, that looks terrible, and it's terrible because it's being applied in just a normal blending mode. In the high pass filter, typically you want to apply in soft light blending mode. So I'm going to double click on the little icon here to the far right of the filter, and that'll bring up the filter blending options, and I can change the mode from normal to soft light. And now it's having the effect that we want. And if I turn this filter off and on, you can see the effect it's having. It's adding a lot of contrast and pop, if you want to call it that, mainly to the structure areas within the squid itself. Now, if I want to change those settings, and again, this is the beauty of a smart filter. If I double click on the high pass filter itself, it reopens the filter settings. Here's that radius of 164.7 pixels. And I can experiment to see if this looks better with a large radius or a smaller radius or something in between. And this is just a matter of dialing it in to what you think looks good. I think somewhere in here looks good, so I'm going to click OK and accept that. And again, I can always come back and change it later. But the point is, all I've had to work on is fine-tuning this new oxygen data, the stars, the star sizes, the HA, all of the other things that I've done are still intact and haven't changed. I think the last thing I'm going to maybe touch on here is how much oxygen we let show through in the background. And so this levels adjustment layer is primarily affecting the red areas, and this is the blue on the red areas. If I turn this levels adjustment off, you can see it lets more of that oxygen that was in the background shine through. And so this becomes more or less a personal aesthetic decision of how much of that do we want to allow into the image. And because of the layer mask, this is only affecting the background and not affecting the main nebula. And I like a little bit of that oxygen to show through. So at this point, I'm going to call this a finished image. I guess I'll do one more thing. I'm going to come to let me talk a little bit about how we're colorizing this, because the HA and the O3, these are both monochrome files. The HA and O3 are both colorized by using a hue saturation layer in colorize blending mode. So let's focus first on the HA since it's on the bottom, and I'll turn on just that layer group. This hue saturation layer is what's coloring this layer red. Without this hue saturation layer, it would just be black and white. And it's red because of the settings in the hue saturation layer. We've turned on the colorize checkbox. We've taken the saturation all the way to the right. I've lowered the lightness to what looks like a reasonable amount. And then with the hue slider, I can decide exactly what shade of red or orange or purple, or what color do I want this background to be. And since it's hydrogen alpha, I want it to be red with maybe just a little hint of orange or yellow in it, but not too much. So we'll say something like that. The oxygen is colored the same way. So let's turn these layers back on. Nope, we don't need that. So in the oxygen layer group, we have the same kind of hue saturation adjustment layer. And here it's dialed in for a blue or with a little bit of cyan color. I can fine-tune the color of the oxygen just by moving this slider back and forth if I want it to be green, cyan, very blue. And I'm gonna say something like that looks good. We can play with the lightness to give it a little bit more prominence or less prominence. I like the transparent look to it, so I like to be able to see the squid, but I also like being able to see through it, so you have that sense of transparency. So if we're happy with that, then I would save this as a new master file. And to do that, I would go to File, Save As, and we need to change the name because this is the original name. So this is actually something like 8103, and I'm going to say for the video. By saving this as a .psb file, that's the Photoshop's large document format. It can handle, I think, up to 60 megabyte files, so very large, 60 gigabyte files, very large files. And that's saving all of these layers intact, all the adjustment layers intact with the settings. So I can close this image, save, turn off the computer, come back tomorrow, reload this file in Photoshop, and all of these settings, all these layers are still intact. The smart objects are still there. I can still go back and adjust those settings again if I want to. So that's my approach for collecting additional data and then adding it to a project that's already underway without starting from scratch and redoing everything. Hope you found this content useful. If you have any questions, be sure to drop those in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer those. If you're interested in remote hosting or capturing remote data through an hourly rental, you can contact us at our website at utahdesertremote.com. And with that, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.